All right. Evening, everyone. You can be seated. I guess I should say surprise. David got a little darker for this class here. All that sunlight. No, David had some pressing issues, and I will be taking this class for this evening. Seems like I just saw you guys not that long ago. But I'm glad that you're all able to make it back yet once again for another class as we continue forward, moving forward in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification course. We are in unit number 4, which is the respect unit. And if you were able to watch the previous class with David, you will see that he was pretty much summing up the previous chapter, which is chapter 1. So we're kind of moving out of chapter 1, as my first slide shows there. We're moving out of chapter 1 into chapter 2, which is respect for myself. All right. And if you were here for the previous class, like 10, 11 points here, under the page of what I have learned on page 21, of course, David did a great job going back over and rehearsing that information. And I would encourage you as a teacher, and this is really, I mean, you don't really have to kind of think outside the box with this, because as you'll notice when we move forward into the next lesson, we always have a little bit of a review from the previous lesson to gently guide us. Remember, that's a part of how the Peaceful Solution is laid, to gently guide the student from one lesson to another. But as a teacher, going back over and kind of rehearsing the previous lesson and what I have learned, it'll give you kind of some key points to look for as we progress into the next lesson. So we covered that on page 21 for the last class. If you go back to page 21, I just wanted to read that comment in that box there. You see the little construction guy there off to the left. On page 21, it says, choose to be a part of the construction crew that builds respect, not a part of the disrespectful demolition derby that tears you and others down. And the key word there is the very first word in that sentence is choose. Now, we covered this over and over throughout, the first 3 chapters, or the first 3 units, not chapters, the first 3 units that we went into, character, acceptance, and respect, and showed the power and the ability that everyone has, and that is the ability to make a choice. Now, in order for a person to be able to make a right choice, in order for a person to be able to distinguish between right and wrong, in order for a person to be able to make an educated decision, they have to have the facts. They have to be educated. They have to be taught in some way, shape, or form, whether they opened up a book and read it, whether they saw it on a news broadcast or in the newspaper, or whether it was taught to them in the school setting or at home by a parent, a teacher, guardian, whatever the case might be. But in order for people to be able to choose or to make a choice, and of course that is one of the ultimate goals of the Peaceful Solution, is to get our students, young men, young women, old women, whoever it might be, get our students to be able to recognize the influences, to be able to recognize the environment that they might be in, to be able to recognize when something is positive and negative, and to understand how that will affect them and others if they choose to allow themselves to be influenced into behaving in a way that brings about harm to themselves, others, and the environment, as well as the opposite, right? Because we talked about goal setting, we talked about understanding a person's purpose and objective. All these things are important. They play a key part in the development of a positive character, but of course, you can't just expect a child, or even an adult for that matter, to even know these things. I mean, these things have to be instilled within a person's mind. Somebody said, when's the best time to start training a person in positive character development, positive character education? Well, the best time is right now. It's wherever you are, right here, right now. We can't go back 10, 15, 20, 30 years and start training somebody over again and getting them to unlearn certain things and to relearn the proper things. No, you can't do that. It's not possible. If we had a reset button, I think that thing would probably get wore out, because people would be resetting it over and over and over and over and over again, doing things over in their life. But the fact is, those experiences that we have had in life, they are a part of the factors that help, as we learned in in the character unit, they are some of the factors that help to make up our character, who we are. Those experiences make us and shape us into the individuals that we are today. Now, does that mean that everybody's, 100% totally a great person, with no flaws, or 100% a totally bad person with no positive traits? No, right? But it's a combination of these things. And of course, as we learn the peaceful solution, then we're able to see, we and our students, we're able to see and associate why certain behaviors took place in our lives, why we made certain choices that we made when we were younger or as we got older. Understanding the environment and the influences and peer pressure and the desire to fit in, or maybe not appreciating our own self-worth and so forth. All these are factors and keys that play a part in the decisions that we make and ultimately the person that we become. Now, as we covered in the first chapter, and as we move forward here, but keep this in mind, because sometimes people might feel like they are continuously in a rut, right? I think, we've probably been in that situation, most of us, where it seems like, it might be a day, it might be a week, or it might be a month or whatever. It just seems like sometimes it seems like it's a year or two, when we're in that kind of feel like that rut, that mental rut. Well, young people go through this too, right? Where it feels like there's just no escape. I keep making bad choices, nothing goes right for me and so forth. Well, it's just one grain of sand in the sands of time. And of course, the goal is to get them to understand that, all right, acknowledge what's taking place, try to go back to the source or the cause of it, and then make better decisions in the future. Sitting there, and we looked at the example of the little pig wallowing in the mire, not beating yourself up over a bad choice, right? We all make bad choices or wrong choices, and most of the time it's because of a lack of education. It's a lack of knowing what the consequence of that bad choice could bring about in our lives. But when they understand that and they have purpose, and remember, these are the things we covered in the first unit and the second unit and so forth, especially unit 2 and acceptance, about purposes and goals. I would encourage you occasionally, to go back and reread that. That's important for all of us, especially as adults. We can't lose sight of our purposes and our goals. I know those of you who are joining us online and locally here, it's evident that one of your goals is to not only become a better person, but to help other people become better. I mean, that's what a teacher does. Remember, a teacher is also someone who role models positive behavior traits, positive character traits, and so forth. And that fits right along with the purpose of what is to be brought forth through character education here. So, keep these things in mind, and kind of always have them on the forefront of your mind as teachers. You're going to have difficult days. You're going to have tough times. You're going to have situations where, as we talked about, they will test your resolve to develop a positive character. But if you have your goals and your purposes always in your mind there, and remember, it's our job to role model these things to our students, right? It's nothing wrong with telling your students, I want to become the best example of a peacemaker, the best example of what we're learning here in this peaceful solution to everyone that I encounter. Now, they're going to hold you to that. If you tell them that, they're going to hold you to that. And if they see you getting a little bit, angry at something, or, losing self-control, they're going to quickly remind you, I thought you were supposed to want to be the best teacher, and so forth, So, but there's nothing wrong with being accountable for your actions, right? There's nothing wrong with even sometimes sharing your positive goals with others, because you never know, someone might have the same goal, or you might be an inspiration to somebody who would like to do something of that nature. Well, let's look on page 23. Now, this is some additional reading activities about, this was, of course, you have enrichment activities that come after every lesson that you can go back and go over. In fact, page 22, it says there, write an essay about what respect means to you and make an acronym about the word respect. And then these are some of the activities that can take place. You can give to your students to assign them to enhance the lessons even more. Also, number 3, read the article, Another Homeless Death, on page 22 and discuss how disrespect was shown. And do the Just for Fun activity on page 23. And so that's on page 22, 23, and then 24. We won't go over the crossword puzzle right now. All right, so let's look over to Lesson Plan 2, page A. Lesson Plan 2, page A. And this is where we get into Chapter 2, Respect for Myself. And this is, of course, the note to the teacher. And this is where we should pay very close attention to this, because even though as teachers we're instructing our students, it's also important that we be instructed as well, right? And so this is where we get the foundation of what our job is as the teacher. This is a little kind of before, it's kind of more like a letter, a note or a letter to the teacher, like, hey, this is the purpose and the goal of this lesson, and this is what we see taking place in society. This is what we want to accomplish in our students, so read this. So this is entitled Note to the Teacher, and this is the Chapter 2, Respect for Myself. So we lay the foundation in Chapter 1 of what respect is, how it looks, how it affects society, a little bit about how disrespect looks and how it affects society, the environment around us, and ripples outward and so forth. Now with that foundation being laid, because you can't get into understanding respect for yourself if you don't even have the foundation of what respect is to begin with. Okay, so it might seem kind of like we're kind of going back and forth, but we're really not, right? We had to lay that foundation first, and then as we move forward, you'll see how it all ties in as all the 7 chapters of each unit is laid out. So it says, someone once said, if we are to achieve real peace in the world, we shall have to begin with our children. Does anybody remember who said that? That's right, Mahatma Gandhi, right? I didn't go to high school with him. He was long before my time, but he was somebody that's actually mentioned in the Peaceful Solution who is, he had some great ideas about peace, right? He didn't have everything, but he did have great, you could tell he was taught and brought up with certain values and morals and so forth, and he pushed for trying to bring about change within his country, right, within his own community, without using violence. And there are many people who have pushed to bring about change, or as it's called, social change within a society, a collection of groups, a collection of people, a group of people with the shared values, likes, interests, and they live by the shared set of rules and so forth. But to make it better, to make it better for society, you're thinking about not just us right now. When I, as an adult and as a parent, think about the things that I can do to impact my society, the world around me, my nation, my city, my town, my neighborhood, whatever it is, I think not only of me, but also of future generations, not just my children, but children who will grow up and have to be an adult in that world. Every generation who comes after us is left with the decisions of that previous generation. Whether it's financial. I just heard on the news today that I don't know if it's in a few hours or by tomorrow, the United States will reach its debt ceiling, right? It'll reach its debt ceiling. So we've got a certain amount of time to do what? Raise the debt ceiling. That was the exact next words out of the news broadcaster's mouth. They have to decide on raising the debt ceiling. Not stopping the spending or lowering the debt. Let's raise it. Now imagine if all of us were able to do the very things that we see taking place in not just the United States, but many, many governments. Oh man, you're kind of maxed out on your credit card. Well, just raise the limit on it. Just give me more money. Now I'm only at 50% credit utilization, not 99 anymore. But when we think about this now, it's a little bit different for us to see as being educated in the Peaceful Solution and understanding right choices and understanding how those choices affect ourselves, affect our economy, affect other nations, nations that we have to trade with, nations that rely on our currency and how our currency affects the value of their currency and their greats and their products and so forth. And the peaceful solution covers that too. It gets into, I guess, what you could call fiscal responsibility, right? Financial responsibility, teaching a person how to be accountable for the decisions that they make, not only in regards to just, well, I'm not going to steal, or I'm going to say, nice things about this person, but how they handle their resources, right? You see a lot of people who are in the world or in society, I guess I should say, who, they play a $2 scratch off, or they hit the lottery. I think somebody recently just won the $1.3 billion Mega Millions lottery. And if you ever get an opportunity, this would be a great opportunity to show to your students on why, and I say this because a lot of young people think that the goal or the key to success or a measure of success is being rich, having a lot of money, okay? And this is what's put in the minds of the people. Look, they watch stuff on MTV, they see things on YouTube, they see, people, standing in front of flashy cars, flipping $100 bills, not knowing that it's probably fake, not knowing that the cars are probably rented. There's people who actually make money renting out their houses, their cars, and so forth to people who want to make videos about being wealthy, right? But that's what they think. They think that that's the measure of success. But there are videos out there that show people who've actually come into big windfalls of money suddenly, through lottery or sometimes maybe even inheritance, like an overnight millionaire, or tens or hundreds of millionaires. And, those people were more broke afterwards than they were. They were in more debt after they got millions and millions of dollars, in worse shape, in greater misery, more depression, all the friends that they gained, all of a sudden, they all dispersed very quickly, after all the money was gone. And a lot of them have said, now, not everyone, some of them are a little, they're responsible. But the majority of them were saying, I would have never won that money, right? Because money doesn't change your character, right? It doesn't all of a sudden you have $10 million in the bank. That doesn't make you a more responsible person. I think of it as like, getting a bigger space, right? You have a little storage building and you fill that storage building up with junk or storage. And then you get a bigger storage building and you're like, man, what am I going to do with all this space? And a year later, man, I can't see anything in here. It's so packed with junk, right? The more space you have, the more money you have, the more things there are to spend it on. Well, without character education, a sound moral character that will enable you to make right choices and to stop and think, not make impulsive decisions, not make decisions that you don't think about the consequences later, you'll be in worse shape after whatever the case might be, in that case, a big windfall, than you would before. So someone once said, if we are to achieve real peace in the world, we shall have to begin with our children. And that is very true, because children, they set the pace, they set the tone for the next generation, and of course, and will be eventually responsible for the direction of our society. For many reasons, true peace does not exist. True peace does not exist within our world today. If I have a slide in there, slide number 2. I actually forgot to change the title of it. It's not supposed to be effort; it's supposed to be true. So I apologize about that. It's supposed to be true. The definition of the word true. And if you look at that there, it says the word definition of the word true. Now, so we're talking about, for many reasons, true peace does not exist within our world today. And the definition there is in accordance with fact or reality. Okay, true peace. True peace, or peace that is in accordance with fact or reality. Now, remember what William talked about in regards to true and false facts. You can have a false peace, kind of like a false feeling of security, right? Like when people go out and they carry a taser with them, but they're going hiking in Alaska where there's grizzly bears, right? They got a false sense of security, I don't think the bear's going to say, "Don't tase me, bro." I think he's going to go ahead and have him a meal, But it has to be in accordance with facts, right? Facts that actually will bring about peace when they're put into practice. And now that's a verb there. Now the second definition it's an adjective, and it means bring, and it gives the parentheses there. It could be an object, a wheel, or other construction into the exact shape, alignment, or position. All right. Now you probably heard that. You want to make sure that particular those tools or that alignment could be a bearing or anything like that. You want to make sure it's true, right? In other words, that it's exactly where it's supposed to be. It's exactly in the position, the prescribed or calculated or engineered position. It's like when you look at if you've ever looked at it could be any mechanical thing, but some things have a lot tighter tolerances. But like a jet engine, right? They have very tight tolerances, and when they take those things apart and they put those things back together, they have to make sure that each component is true. It has to be in the exact position that it was engineered to be, because you're talking about something that's spinning at thousands of RPMs per minute. Okay, and if something's out of alignment, that 36,000 feet in the air, right? AAA don't send tow trucks, at 5 miles high, and something can go wrong very quickly. Well, we're talking about peace. So if the components of peace, which are based on facts, are not in existence, where? In the minds and the hearts of the people. Because peace comes about through people interacting with one another. So if they don't have the truth of how to be peaceful, how to teach peace, how to, be an example of peace to others, then you're not going to have this. And this is why it doesn't exist in our world. This is why education is so important. We've got a lot of education in the world, no doubt, but education in positive moral character is vastly lacking. So it says, our children are suffering, and as parents and educators, we suffer with them, right? And that's kind of a twofold statement in regards to our children are suffering, because they're suffering as victims, but they're also suffering as perpetrators. And when I say suffering as perpetrators, that is, it's easy to look at a child, a young person, and they usually, the U.S. government, the CDC, Justice Department, all these different organizations, they kind of classify children in their most demographics between the ages of, and I mean, when I say this, I'm saying people who are at a point in their life where they're a little more accountable for their decisions, between the ages of 14 and 19 or 14 and 25. Okay. But they also can be the perpetrators, right? They could also be the causers of violence and crime and peace being taken out of society. This is why we have juvenile delinquency. They call them kiddie jails, right? They call it because young people are making bad choices. Why? Because they're not educated. They haven't been given the facts that will enable them to be a part of bringing true peace within a society, even if that society is down on a smaller scale and called a home or a family. Many young people take peace out of the family continuously, right? If you look at the next slide there, and this was from the justice.gov, it says, what percentage of children are victims of violence? And so we see it on one side of the coin here. It says 60%. Think about this. 60% of American children, just in the United States, right? It's a big world out there. But just taking a look at the United States of America, 60% of American children were exposed to violence, crime, or abuse in their homes, schools, and communities. 60%, over half. That's what's reported. I would dare say the number is much higher because a lot of these crimes don't go reported. They go underreported, in fact. And so the statistics are not as accurate, but they're pretty close, I'm sure, at the very least. It says almost 40% of American children were direct victims of 2 or more violent acts, and 1 in 10 were victims of violence 5 or more times. Children are more likely to be exposed to violence and crime than adults, okay? And they're very impressionable, they're very susceptible, and a lot of times their voice kind of goes unheard, right? Their voice is kind of muffled because, again, these things have to be reported. And a lot of times they're threatened. They're told, don't you say anything, right? Or this is going to occur, or you'll be taken out of here, or you have to go live here, or you're not going to have home. And so there's a threat placed upon their head, so they're afraid to say anything to anybody. So they, as we talked about in regards to the self-control unit, chapter 3, in dealing with anger, right? In dealing with anger, you have withdrawal, internalization, and displacement, right? Internalizing and displacement. So these young people, they go through the same things because they're having a conflict that's taking place in their life, and it probably is a trigger for anger in some way, shape, or form. And they will act out in one of 3 of those ways. They'll internalize it, which, you know, if you've ever seen taking a balloon or anything like that, and you continue to fill it with air or a tire, you know, and you go off and you do something else, well, that tire has kind of stretching limits. You know, it has a capacity. And little people, young people, they have only a certain amount of capacity to take things. They're not really designed and educated to take, you know, the hardships and the psychological abuse that comes from adults, sometimes parents, guardians, bullies at school, and sadly, sometimes even the teachers, people who are supposed to be responsible for them. And so eventually they kind of pop, right? And it comes out in some way. You know, sometimes it might just be shouting. Sometimes it might be, you know, throwing a tantrum or something like that. Sometimes, as we read, they go into actually hurting themselves. You know, they cut themselves. Sometimes they burn themselves. Sometimes they'll actually go through with the whole thing and commit suicide. You know, these are things that take place on a regular basis. Or they will displace these behaviors or these feelings on other people or things. So it says here, as it continues, our children are suffering, and as parents and educators, we are suffering with them. Well, let me see here. Do I want to? Yeah, let's look at the next slide there, because it's the cost of youth crimes. It says thousands of people experience youth violence every day. Youth violence negatively impacts youth in all communities: urban, suburban, rural, and tribal. Youth violence is common. 1 in 5 high school students reported being bullied on school property in the past year. Now that's reported, which means it's probably more like 3 or 4, possibly even 5 in 5 high school students have been bullied, but they're not reporting it. Why? Because they're too afraid. They don't want to be considered a rat or a snitch or a tattletale or whatever the case might be. On the third point there, it says youth violence kills and injuries. It says homicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for young people ages 10 through 24. Each day, approximately 12 young people are victims of homicide, and almost 1,400 are treated in emergency departments for non-fatal assault-related injuries. Approximately 10 young people are victims of homicide every day. Youth violence is costly. Youth homicides for non-fatal physical assault-related injuries resulted in an estimated $18.2 billion annually in combined medical and lost productivity alone. Now, that is just in regards to violence. There's a lot of other things that are taking place in regards to crimes that are committed by youth that are non-violent, but it still costs, as we're going to see in a little bit here. It says the impact, last point there, of youth violence is not the same for all young people and communities. The rates and types of youth violence vary across communities and across subgroups of youth. These disparities can be attributed to different exposure, different exposure to risk and protective factors. Now, I'll insert there that that risk, those exposure to risk and protective factors, I would say primarily comes in the form of education. Okay. Different exposures to certain levels of education that would teach them to be a contributing, positive, productive member of society, or teach them to be engaged in risk-taking behavior that jeopardizes their health and safety, and of course the lives of them and other people. As we saw, 12 people, 12 youth each day are victims of homicide. Let's take a look at the, it's video 1, which I think is the only one there. We're going to just take a look real quick at how youth crimes are affecting just one community, just one.
Local retail expert says theft and shoplifting appear to be on the rise, and the suspects are younger than you might think. Jen Boniza has more.
Crime decreased across the board during the pandemic. Now that life is almost back to normal, crime rates, especially for juveniles, are on the rise again. People are returning to their everyday lives now that pandemic shutdowns and store closures are behind us. But that means crime is also increasing. According to HPD's crime statistics, juvenile arrests dipped in 2020. The 2021 statistics aren't in yet, but a retail industry expert says it's clear theft is on the rise again.
So once the stores opened, we started to see a lot of grab and goes, a lot of people shoplifting, a lot of the same suspects coming back into the stores again, and lifting things, and it's sad.
And she says many of the criminals are younger than you'd think.
Everybody thinks people who are shoplifting, they're adults, and that's not really the case. What we're seeing with organized retail crime is we've seen kids that are as young as in elementary to intermediate school.
According to police, on March 15th, a 15-year-old boy attempted to steal more than $27,000 in jewelry from a store at a popular shopping center.
There was a theft that happened at one of the stores at Waikele, and there was a lot of jewelry that was stolen. And my understanding is the suspect has been apprehended.
Yamaki says she's happy that Honolulu's prosecutor seems more willing to prosecute these types of cases. Now it's up to judges to ensure the penalty fits the crime, because she says without adequate consequences, juvenile offenders are likely to reoffend. Places like the YMCA have intervention programs to help steer at-risk youth in the right direction.
We provide programs in the high schools and middle schools across the island, and we do intervention, prevention, as well as treatment for substance abuse, along with outreach to at-risk youth in the schools.
He says it's a safe, supervised place for teens to hang out after school, during breaks, and summertime.
I think that's where kids are most at risk to get in trouble, is during those times where they're not supervised.
Jen Boniza, KHON2 News, working for Hawaii.
Now, I don't know about you, but I would like the opportunity to go and teach those fine people down in Hawaii, personally, about the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. If given the opportunity, any volunteers want to go? All right. But as you can see there, you know, that these are crimes, these are major crimes that are being committed by young people, right? It's not just older people that are doing these things. $27,000 in jewelry stolen. That costs the community in loss and productivity, and they have to recover, they have to make an insurance claim on it, or whatever the case might be. And of course, creating stronger laws and greater punishments for these types of crimes that are committed. They, as Grandma used to say, bless their hearts. It's not the solution. The solution is educating them, right? To keep them from doing the same things that they're doing, you have to educate them or habilitate them so that they can understand the consequences of their choices. First off, as we're covering in here in chapter 2, they've got to have respect for themselves. If they don't understand or have respect for themselves, then they're not going to have respect for other people or the belongings, the possessions, the property of other people, or the environment. I want you to think about something here, because in that definition, I kind of meant to bring this out. I skipped it over a little bit. Under the second definition of bring into shape or alignment, it kind of made me think about what we're learning in the Peaceful Solution, shape or an alignment or a position. right? And what, of course, we're shaping or aligning is our minds and our character with the information that's being presented here. Just for your notes on page 4 of the character unit, this is unit 1, it talks about character. Everyone has it, but where does it come from? In the very first paragraph, at the very bottom of that paragraph, it says, well, if we look in the middle there, it says, in fact, our character is an integral part of who we are. Whether the character we have is positive or negative depends upon many factors. These factors include genetics, family values, influences, experiences, choices, and environments. Environment. I like to kind of memorize those 6 points because those are keys to understanding the things, the factors that make up our character. Together, they help mold and shape our character. They help build our character. They put our character into a certain position, whether it's a positive or a negative one. If you look down, well, you probably don't have your book, but that second paragraph, second to last sentence, it says, it talks about behavioral traits and physical traits and so forth. It says, these are called fixed traits because once determined physically, like eye and skin color and things of that nature, because once determined genetically, your environment cannot change them. On the other hand, how your character and personality develop is not only based on your heredity, but also on your environment. And that's what we covered in the first chapter there, or the first paragraph there. And in the third paragraph there, last sentence, it says, the important point to remember, though, is that your character and personality are not fixed like your skin and eye color. Character and personality can change and develop as you experience and learn new things. Now, it's kind of open right there because you can experience and learn bad things. You can experience and learn negative things, and your character can start shifting in the wrong direction, right? So it could be either positive or negative things. Of course, the goal is positive, but we have to be aware of that, okay? Also in the chapter 5 of the character unit on page 105 in regards to building a character, I'm just tying this in with the definition of true because we're talking about true peace. And in order to have true peace, you have to build or align or positions people's minds with the goal of developing a positive character. And this is under the ripple effect, character, society, and the world. And it's under the heading introduction. It says, our character dictates our behavior and our actions. And this is why we don't have true peace. The reason we don't have true peace is the result. A society of violence, high crime, poverty, those are symptoms. Those are not the causes, those are the symptoms of other factors. Okay? And these go right back to the decisions, the collective decisions, and that we're not generalizing everyone and saying everyone's making bad decisions or some people just don't care or everyone doesn't care or no one has respect. No one has respect for the community. This is why our community is run down and boarded up and, graffiti all. No, that's not the case, all right? But sadly in our society, the majority kind of wins out. When you have a great majority of people who have that mentality, then yeah, it's going to impact the society in a negative way until someone, starts to redirect the focus and the thought of the community in a positive way. And a lot of people have done that. They've taken initiatives to clean up their neighborhood. They've started like neighborhood watch programs, crime stoppers and things like that to try to prevent crimes and to report certain things. There, initiatives to kind of clean up the environment, paint over the graffiti on the walls, and sometimes even get the guys who do the graffiti, get them out into do murals or things that would build up the community, help the community look great. Okay, you got a great skill. Some of these tag artists, they're pretty darn talented, right? But they're trespassing on other people's property, right? They're vandalizing. They don't have permission to do it. Now, if they get permission, they can use that skill to do something positive, and we've seen many things like that take place. And it gives them an outlet, but it's in a positive way, it's with permission, and it doesn't decrease the value of the environment or the neighborhood. So it says, there are very few activities that we do on a daily basis. I'm back reading off of page 105 in the character unit. On the daily basis in which we are not directly interacting with someone. And those interactions are going to bring about a sense of peace or a sense of, not necessarily war. Eventually, it could lead to war, but take away that individual's peace. When a group of people live under a common body of laws and share common values and interests, they are called a society. In the same way character shapes an individual, it can also shape society. So this is why, for many reasons, true peace does not exist within our world. Now, you can think about it from the standpoint of a global society, right? So when people who live, let me go back and read this here. In the same way character shapes an individual, it can also shape a society, which in terms forms a nation, or the international community, however big you want to get, okay? But it's all made up of people and their character and the decisions that they make. So when you have a majority of people who do not adhere to certain rules or guidelines or principles, as we learned in the first chapter of the character unit, moral principles, they're a line that separates right from wrong, then you don't have true peace, because they're not upholding those values. They're not upholding those principles. They have not valued them themselves, more than likely because they have not been taught to value them. And that's where your job comes in. In essence, character can shape our world. A choice, either positive or negative, starts with one person, but can affect not only that person, but also a family, society, and even the entire world. So for us, right, we can see that that it's more than just what you see taking place on the news. It's a little bit deeper, because we understand why the society is in the state that it is. It's like I think about it like a path or a rut, right, in the forest or on the grass or whatever. And if one person one time walks down that across that grass or through the woods or whatever, probably wouldn't do anything. There's just maybe a couple of blades of grass will fall down. Eventually, they'll stand back up in the light, right? But imagine 10 people walking down that, then 30, then 100, then 10,000. Eventually, you're going to wear out a path, right? And that wearing out that path shows the direction of the path, the direction that everybody walks back and forth. Well, it's the same thing with choices, right? You might think, well, if one person makes a choice, yes, it can affect them. Yes, it can potentially affect a lot of people around them. Like when one person decides to, blow up the Oklahoma, building, that could affect a lot of people, But that's an extreme case of one person's decision. But what about when 1,000 people or 20,000 or several million people choose not to have the value and respect for other people, or the value and respecting other people and their belonging, or other people's choices, right? Or the environment. What occurs when you have 20 million people or 100 million people who follow that same path? Well, eventually all society is going to be affected by that, right? So the more people who continue to make negative choices or engage in negative behaviors, the farther out those ripples are going to spread, and probably the bigger those waves are going to be. Well, it can be the same in a positive direction too, right? It could be positive ripple effects that take place. So it says here, going back to Lesson Plan 2, page A, we cannot be there to protect our children at all times. We're still at the top paragraph there, about middle. We cannot be there to protect our children at all times. So we need to instill in them a sense of worth. By doing so, we can give them the skills to make moral, respectful choices to cope in a disrespectful society. And that's what I've always said is, having the ability, or getting your child to a point where they value themselves, and the choices, making positive choices greater than the peer pressure, than the desire to fit in, then they're less likely to succumb engaging in risk-taking behaviors, because they have value for themselves. They're going to think about, well, if I do this because my friends are, they're egging me on, come on, just take a drink. Just come out, take it. We're just gonna do a little drinking and go to the beach, right? That's never a great idea, do a little drinking and go for a drive down to the park, right? A person who values themselves and understands that they have a purpose and understand that they have goals and keeps those things in the forefront of their mind, they're going to stop and think, well, what could take place? Can any great thing come out of a bunch of drunk friends in an automobile? Probably not, And so they'll stop and they'll think about those things because mom or dad's not going to be standing right there behind them the whole time saying, oh, no, don't make this choice, son, or make sure you make this choice, daughter. No, you have to instill that within your children. You have to instill that within your students to get them to the point where they value themselves and others enough to uphold the moral principles even when no one's around them. Remember, the true test of self-control is what you're doing when no one is looking, okay? On that note there, getting them to have this self-worth in the character unit, lesson plan 3, page A, and this is a note to the teacher at the very last paragraph, at the almost last sentence. It says, hence, we must also teach our children. Well, let's back it up here. It says, we live in a culture where our children's role models are sports players, singers, and movie stars. Remember, these all fall into the classification of influences as well. This would not be an issue. Notice, this would not be an issue if these role models live exemplary lives. But where positive character is lacking, it poses a threat to the moral development of our children. Hence, it's our responsibility as teachers, must teach our children how to choose positive role models and what behaviors are worth imitating, right? Because they're going to see these things. You're not always going to be able to shield your children's eyes, like parents used to do when a certain scene came on the movie. They put their hands over their child's eyes and their child would look this way and look that way. You can't always shield their eyes because you're not with them all the time. A parent doesn't sit at school with their child when they're in class or when they're out on a field trip or when they're walking back, and forth from home to school or whatever the case might be. But when you train them, when you teach them, when you get them to understand that there are certain things worth imitating and other things, just cast it aside. And help them to understand why, if they take those characteristics onto themselves or engage or practice those same behaviors, how it's going to hurt them, right? I mean, we as teachers, we can show many examples just probably pulling things from the things we've experienced, or even there's a lot that's even online that can show how people's lives just went downhill with a series of bad choices. But it all started with one choice, right? And it just continually spiraled downhill. And some of these people were living the quote-unquote high life. They were sports players. They were movie stars. They were singers. They had everything that they felt that life could have to offer. Women and cars and big houses and a bank account full of cash and, friends galore, right? And the popularity and the fame. But they suffered. They suffered because of their choices, right? Wealth does not shield you from bad choices, Some people might say, well, a great lawyer does, but I mean, those bad choices follow you everywhere you go. So it says here, let us work together to ensure that our children appreciate that the true measure of self-worth, okay, this is what we're talking. We want to get our children to have this sense of worth. It's up to us as teachers to instill this sense of worth, aka what we're reading here, self-worth within themselves. The true measure of self-worth and importance is attained through positive character, not how many likes you have on your, social media page or friends that you have on a social media page, or how many people are your friends. No, it's through the development of a positive character. All right, so let's see here. By doing so, instilling in them the sense of self-worth, we can give them the skills to make moral, respectful choices to cope in a disrespectful society. Yes, society is very disrespectful right now. And it doesn't mean that everybody's out there cursing everybody out. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But it's disrespectful because people have not been trained to have care, consideration, and concern for themselves, others, and the environment. Now, this lesson, Respect for Myself, will focus primarily on the importance of acquiring self-respect. If you go back or just make your note there, I just made a little line over there and went back to wrote page 3 there, because that gives us the definition of respect. It's the beginning of the chapter 1, value of respect, and it's in the second paragraph. It says, in this unit of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, you will learn how to develop the positive character trait of respect. Respect means to recognize the value of people and things and to treat them with, now I've always, when we went to different schools and so forth, or done presentations with teachers, I kind of simplified it because I like to simplify things, put them in a nice little bag that you can carry, and you can carry a whole bunch of little bags with you than you can just, a whole bunch of big ones. You can fit more, and kind of condense it and just call it the 3 C's or triple C's in regards to the definition of, and remembering the definition of the word or the character trait respect. Okay. And you see here, it's to recognize the value of people and things and to treat them with consideration, care, and concern. So if you kind of remember that, the 3 C's, consideration, care, and concern, consideration, care, and concern, consideration, care, and concern, and that gives you the definition of what it means to have respect or to show respect. All right, so we go back there and we see that there, acquiring self-respect, which means having consideration, care, and concern for who? Ourselves, for one's self. And this is an essential part of positive moral character development. And consequently, it will also lead to true peace, okay? Because in the first paragraph, we just uncovered the fact there's no true peace, right? Now, we just talked about why there is no true peace. We know that the actions of a society all began with the thoughts that were placed in the mind of the society from many, many years of teaching, environment, choices, influences, right? Values. All these things went into the minds of every single individual. Everyone had these things placed into their minds as a young person, and they led to the development of their character. Children often devalue their own worth, as human beings, and this lack of self-respect sometimes results in choices that leads to risk-taking behavior. All right. Now, sometimes why they devalue themselves, let's see here. Here we go. Is because they don't see the importance of themselves, right? They don't see the importance in themselves. Remember, value is something that's important and worthwhile, right? If it's worthwhile, it's important to you, you're going to take care of it. You're going to take care of, see to it, maintain it, make sure it's in great working order. Well, that includes yourself, your hygiene, your appearances, your health, your mind, by feeding it and putting in positive things that are going to build your mind instead of tearing it down. If you think about this road less traveled here, or think about these values and the things that lead people to engaging in risk-taking behavior, on the page 2 of the character unit under the road less traveled, near the bottom it says, so along with keeping up your appearances, you must keep working to develop a positive moral, justifiable character. In order to avoid these bad scenes that were talked about previously on page 1, you have to start building a positive character and start making choices that are decided ahead of time and are consistently responsible, respectful, honest, and that is just to name a few. Now, without that, it leads to what we just read to right here, a lack of self-respect that leads to risk-taking behaviors. So you kind of see the huge burden, so to speak, or responsibility is a better word, that we as teachers, have in regards to kind of shaping and molding not just the mind, but the thinking process that takes place within the mind of our students. And this is the purpose of this chapter, to get them to understand and to see and have respect for themselves. The latest report from the book by the book Teen Sex by Julie K. Endersby states, quote, the AIDS virus is practically common among young people. 1/5 of all people in the United States have AIDS, who have AIDS, are in their 20s. Now, this is what she's saying here, that 1/5 of all people in the United States who have AIDS are in their 20s. Now, remember, it takes a while for this viral load to kind of build up and develop. And this is where she continues on. She says, these people were most likely infected with HIV in their teens. All right, HIV in their teens. And it was interesting because it was, I don't know, everything seems like it was just a few months ago, but some of this stuff has been like 2 or 3 years. But I was looking at a report because it was some, I don't remember who the name, it wouldn't really matter what their name was, but it was some Hollywood star. I think they were a socialite. In other words, being around a lot of very, very famous people. And they had been for like over 5 to 10 years, right? And then it came out publicly that person was HIV positive. And it said that in the article that it likely was that they acquired it when they were, I think it was like 16 or 18 years old, and they were in their late 20s at that time. Now, at this point, they had been around and probably been engaging in a lot of sexual activities with a lot of people. Now, and those people were with a lot of other people, and those people were with a lot of other people. So you can see how the consequences of engaging in these risk-taking behaviors can start to spread very rapidly within a society because people don't value themselves. They don't know how to value themselves. They don't understand that they have value. So what's the big deal? It's just the body. It's just the life. It's just the dollar. It's just the person, whatever the case might be. And they engage in things, and they engage in impulsive behaviors, not thinking about the consequences. So it says here, they were most likely infected with HIV in their teens. And so if we continue in the peaceful solution, it says, or her comment here, it says, teaching children to value, this is from that book, Teen Sex there, teaching children to value themselves will give them the ability to preserve their health, safety, and well-being. And that's a reward of learning, being educated in moral principles, and putting those things into practice. For some students, this might be the first time they receive any information on how to develop respect for themselves. This is basic groundwork that is necessary for success in their lives. And then we're going to see some of the other topics that are going to be covered in this lesson are the power of optimistic thinking, the importance of having positive internal language, and of course the next teacher will go into more detail about these things, and specific skills for replacing negative self-talk. And that negative self-talk, that is an excellent topic. I can't wait to get into that. Lastly, it says, our suggestion is to pay attention to the needs of the students. As teachers, this is what we're supposed to be doing, emphasizing and reiterating where necessary to ensure that students in the lesson with the firm understanding of how to develop and improve their self-respect. And as we read here, this is probably the first time some might even be receiving this. So it's not just a matter of improving, it might be the initiation of self-respect for them. So I do stop there on lesson plan 2, page A, and the next teacher will probably go over that last part there. The next teacher will be, it'll be William or David, but our class will be the 22nd, 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Again, we do thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the very next class. Have a wonderful day, everyone.